Hi, I'm Stephen Curzon coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. My location is slightly relevant to our topic today. Um, let's see. Oh, yeah. Support for the show is gratefully received on Subscribestar. You can find the link in the YouTube video description. Most people chip in $5 a month, but it adds up. Lets me pay my graphic designer, subscribe to the Wall Street Journal, this and that. But it really helps. Okay, so let's get right to it. We're going to have a fairly focused topic today. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon. How are things out in the windy Midwest?
Well, we're actually having an unusually nice day. It's 62-degree high, right in the middle of
Wow.
winter here. Yeah, I know.
Okay, I thought we were
After,
having a nice day. That's
oh,
a nice day.
are you actually above freezing?
Yeah, we're above freezing. It
Right.
was nice this morning. So
I was going to say just being above freezing after we had a lot of really cold weather. Just being above freezing felt like it might as well be summer.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, Yeah, my children are actually out bouncing on the trampoline. It was fun.
Oh, there you go.
The young ones. Yeah, this topic today, well, there's a lot to say to get into it, but um, one of the things that comes to mind is it sort of fits in with some of the things you've talked about. You educated us a little bit about the power blocks in Canada, and that there may not be total alignment between, the metropolitan center of Canada, I guess you could say, which is over in the east, and then some of the sort of agricultural and energy producing sections, which is more in the west, to simplify it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's going to come in as well as, shocker, a similar breakdown in the US, right? Between the eastern power block and then the west of the US, which, like the west of Canada, has energy production, for example, right?
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to address this topic partly because, partly to discuss the internal politics of the U.S., but also partly to discuss kind of the politics of the U.S. empire and
Yes.
how this fits into a kind of geopolitics sort of framework. I've heard now like repeatedly for years how this gas pipeline or that gas pipeline or this resource or that resource are the reason why the US is going to war.
Hmm.
And I think that
No blood for oil, right?
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. This was like in my ear constantly during the Bush administration.
Right.
And I hopefully this discussion will provide some nuance to kind of understand those politics a little bit better.
Right. And in particular, you have a direction that I'm immediately uh, open to because Justin Raimondo, my old friend who was editorial director at antiwar.com, I should say, um, and wrote very astutely on foreign policy. One of his regular themes was that if you want to understand foreign policy, the key is to understand how domestic politics is driving it.
Yeah, that's actually identical. When I was a student of Canadian history in the academic world, my professor of foreign policy, every lecture he would begin with the lesson of Canadian policy history is that foreign policy begins at home.
Yeah,
Right.
there you go. Right.
um,
So yes, this is a plausible connection to make. But having said that, that's a nice glittering generality. I think you're going to be able to connect the dots in regards to the energy market quite nicely
yeah.
for us today. Okay, so shall we go right to the first picture?
Sure. So the current foreign policy topic of the day is Iran. And
Mm-hmm.
I heard repeatedly on Twitter how the war in Iran is deeply tangled up with the natural gas markets. So I
Yeah.
thought maybe we would start with the natural gas markets. So we'll begin with uh, the cold water on this. This is a list of natural gas exporting countries. Um, you can see Iran there, number 16, quite respectable 12 billion cubic meters per year in exports.
Mm-hmm.
However, however, if you look at that in the international context, um, Iran's natural gas exports are not exactly going to make or break the international market.
Right.
Um, so, it's not just number 16, but it could fit inside Russia's natural gas exports, you know, whatever it is, 20 times, something like
Yeah,
that.
right. Yeah, it's a rounding error for what Russia exports, or what the U.S.
So,
exports for that matter. Right.
yeah, with the Russia exports, I mean, it's a rounding error in terms of what Norway exports. Um,
Right. Yeah.
and nobody's conquering Norway to get their natural gas. So, uh, just kind of have that in the back of your mind
Yep.
in foreign policy discussions. The reason people get this impression is because Iran does in fact produce a lot of natural gas. So if you
Right.
flip
Here
over
we go.
in terms
Yeah.
of actual production, Iran is the third largest producer of natural gas in the world. Well, how can it be the third largest producer and not have natural gas and not be the third largest exporter, or even in the top 10 in exporters?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, well, the answer to that is pretty simple. It's quite difficult to move natural gas. It's a gas, after all. If you don't contain it properly, it just kind of drifts away.
Light leaks
Um,
out. Yeah.
yes, and so there's a whole process that requires quite sophisticated equipment to um, store it. Equally, as many people may or may not know, the natural gas which is produced in Iran is not produced intentionally for sale in the market. It's produced as a byproduct of their oil drilling operation. For those
Mm-hmm.
who don't
Mm-hmm.
know, uh, like the vast majority of natural gas produced in the world is not produced for its own sake. It's produced as a byproduct of oil drilling. Different oil reserves have different quantities of natural gas under
Mm.
pressure that are mixed in. Um, and Iran's oil reserve, much more so than the others in the Persian Gulf, has a lot of pressurized natural gas that comes along with its extraction. And the powers that be in Iran have elected to use that natural gas as the primary driver for power generation in the country.
So there's a bit of context that I'm confused about, which is the significance of natural gas relative to oil. Because I guess, like the no blood for, they didn't say no blood for natural gas. So I think that the general layman's perception, which is pretty much mine, is that
Yeah.
uh, oil is the major energy story in the world and natural gas is like a footnote. Is that unfair? Is that a bad perception?
That's a very bad perception.
Oh,
So
okay.
natural gas and its role in the generation of electricity is the primary driver of of the industrial market for energy
Oh,
now.
wow.
So
Just
oil
that.
oil is the key commodity for transport. So
Right.
transport and the industrial production of certain derivatives. So if you want to know what makes jet fuel, if you want to know what keeps your car driving, if you want to know uh, what makes plastics, that's the oil market.
Right.
Whereas if you want to make steel, if you want to keep the lights on, if you want to, well, increasingly derivatives now, but if you want to make steel, if you want to keep the lights on, if you want to do like auto manufacturing or something, that process is overwhelmingly powered by natural gas.
Right. So
Um,
if you wanted to say for some weird reason deindustrialize Germany, you might make natural gas really expensive for them.
that's correct.
Let us
The
imagine.
let's imagine, yes. So when thinking about foreign policy,
Hmm.
um, the layman, particularly in America, tends to think about oil because of the legacy of the embargo in the 70s, and
Right.
and
Yeah.
that
And
that
because we
set of
all
scenario.
we experienced it or we remember, our parents talk about it or whatever. I was young.
Yeah.
I was old enough. I'm old enough that I remember the lines at the gas stations and stuff in the 70s. But anyway, um,
Well, and the consumer also
that touched every consumer very directly in a way that the effect on industrialization of natural gas prices, that's going to be pretty abstract to your normal person on the street, right?
Yeah, not a lot of people work in steel plants. Not a lot of people work
Right.
in like aluminum refineries or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's much more abstract, and most Americans don't know that most of their electricity comes from natural gas.
I did not know that. I thought they were like it was like coal and stuff, but they've been trying to shift away from coal, and that's been successful, I guess. It.
Well, yeah, because natural gas is way cheaper than coal, right?
Oh, okay.
So
Oh, okay. So
it,
I always
it
thought it was
turns,
like the evil government was making people stop using efficient coal just because it's a little dirty or something. You're saying no, actually, they didn't have to be dragged
yeah,
kicking and screaming to switch to natural gas. It's just cheaper.
yeah. In point of fact, in the U.S., almost all success at reducing carbon emissions, and there's been a lot of success in reducing carbon emissions, has been a consequence of the overproduction of natural gas, and almost none of it has to do with any investments in green energy or
Okay. Yeah.
regulatory changes.
Right. Right. But it all kind of gets fuzzed together as a big green energy win or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
we kind of experience this more acutely in Canada because our government is trying to shut down natural gas energy production, um, which is like fascinating. But anyways,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
that's a whole other story.
Now, having said that, in terms of natural gas versus oil and foreign policy, some of us may remember that there was this Nord Stream pipeline, and it wasn't carrying oil, as I recall. It was actually a
No,
natural gas pipeline, right?
that's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
and
And so if we
that became for anyone paying attention, that caught your attention that this Nord Stream pipeline got destroyed in the middle of the Ukraine war, probably related to the Ukraine war somehow.
yes, yes, and clearly destroyed by Russia. So
Right? Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Um,
Okay,
okay.
so
Yeah. So next thing you wanted to bring in, I don't know how you're going to segue to this.
now the next question is, okay, so natural gas is this really important commodity.
Yep.
It's produced in quantities very different than how it's exported.
Hmm.
Um, and so uh, the next question is, uh, are we dealing with a resource which is like, how is this resource constrained? Is there a lack of deposits? Is it all centralized somewhere?
Hmm.
Is
Hmm.
production very difficult? What's the process here?
Right.
And
And
the answer,
specifically to contrast with oil, well, we see it seems like every year I hear about a new place that figured out they have oil or something. But at least
yeah.
originally we thought of oil as like, the Middle East was really the best supply of oil, right? And that
Well,
has
the beauty,
changed over time, but I don't think it's fair to say that like every country has a great source of oil, right? It's still a handful of major sources around the world, right?
well, it's also the cost to extract. So, oil from the Middle East costs like a buck 30 a barrel to extract from the ground.
Wow.
So basically, every dollar that you pay for a barrel of oil from the Middle East goes into the pockets of whoever owns the goes into Aramco's pockets.
Yeah, not oil production or oil extraction. It's purely just buying the natural resource from them. Yeah.
Whereas oil from, for example, the tar sands in Western Canada costs something like $50 a barrel to pull out of the ground.
Oh, wow.
So it's a big, big difference. So when you hear somebody else realizing they have oil, 99% of that is, well, we always knew there was oil down there, but oil prices are now at a point where it makes sense to pull it out versus they're now
Yeah,
not at a point where it makes sense to pull it out.
right.
Um, so uh, in the case of natural gas, you have a really interesting twist on this dynamic because most places you extract oil, you get natural gas,
Hmm.
but natural gas is quite expensive to distribute. So you get this weird phenomena that most people aren't aware of called flaring. So this is what used to be done with all natural gas when oil was extracted, but it's still done in various places. So this is a satellite photo of the Bakken Shale field at night. People are drilling in the Bakken Shale field for oil, and they produce natural gas as a byproduct. But the US government has forbidden the construction of many pipelines intended to access this field,
Hmm.
particularly the Keystone pipeline. And because of this, it's impossible or uneconomical to get this natural gas to market. So instead, they flare it off. So
Right, and I
uh,
I did some Googling trying to understand, well, why do they flare it? Why don't they just let it into the air? And I got like 12 answers. It's, well, it is like better for the environment to flare it than to just let it leak into the air. But also there's like pressure in the equipment. And if you don't flare it, it can mess up the pressure in the equipment. Anyway, seems like someone
well,
who's actually in the industry could give us a better answer.
yeah, I mean, one of the key issues is having a bunch of natural gas floating around in the air around your equipment is extremely dangerous.
Yeah,
So
right.
they used to
You'd
call it
rather you'd rather control burn it than be surprised, right?
well, in Western Canada, they used to call it prairie barbecue. So if you go out in the spring in Western Canada, you can find little bubbles leaking out of the ground in the meltwater pools in the spring, and you can
Mm,
literally cook your dinner just on a grassy field.
wow.
Uh, but you got to be careful because if there's too much coming out, you might become dinner.
Right,
So
right, right. Yeah, and just really looking at this, I didn't fully understand what I was looking at. Okay, so this is just a night satellite. It's not only showing flaring, it's showing Minneapolis, St. Paul, a nearby major metropolitan area, but that gives us a brightness comparison. And though Minneapolis, St. Paul is more concentrated, it looks to me like about as much light is coming from the back end fields here. It's
yeah, so
just spread out a little bit more. So this is
Minneapolis
a
is a city
lot.
of what? Minneapolis is a city of a couple of million people. I think 2 or 3 million, right?
Right.
You imagine all the lights in a city of 2 or 3 million. You're producing the same amount of light flaring off natural gas. It's kind of wild.
Yeah. Yeah. So and this is very common. And I think part of your point in driving this home is um, we are literally burning natural gas rather than using it because there's so much and it isn't always economical to bother trying to use it. Right.
Yeah, so when people talk about natural gas in the context of geopolitics, it's important to understand that it's not a scarcity story. So according to the
Mm-hmm.
IEA, which is the International Energy Association, that got, you know, their members are many oil producing companies. Uh, about 140 billion cubic meters of natural gas are burned as waste every year. So about two-thirds of the total production of Iran, the number three producer, is what's burned off as waste.
But that's
So
globally. That's globally, right?
that's all the reporting countries in the IEA.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
that's the Middle Eastern countries in America. So, for example, Russian flaring is undisclosed.
Man, this is making me want to look at the night shots, which I always assumed I was looking at human, uh, you know, city lights and stuff like that, right? And
Yeah.
now I want to go around and look at those satellite photos and try to figure out where is it that it's not city lights, it's flaring.
Well, given that Russia produces something like 40% of the world's natural gas, you would assume either they do a much better job of capturing it in
Mm-hmm.
extraction than the Americans do, which seems kind of I don't know. I
Could
suspect that
be.
Russia probably uh, doesn't have restrictions on pipelines for political reasons. Maybe I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, but definitely there's some flaring going on. That's not well reported.
Yeah.
Equally, places like India and China, I'm sure, do their share of flaring, and
Right.
nobody knows or cares.
Yeah. Speaking of flaring, a friend works in the back end fields, we found out today, and sent us a video, which, with his permission, I will play. This is in the daytime, and still you can see it.
So there you go. That's going on all day, all night, across tens of thousands of operations across the Midwest of the U.S. and probably other places as well.
Oh
Um,
no, I think that. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm seeing it. I'm just seeing it in the playback. I thought it wasn't showing the video, but it is. Okay, cool. Yeah, so this is just as we saw in that map. There's a ton of these scattered over the back end fields and all over the world wherever they're doing oil or natural gas extraction, right?
yeah, yeah. I have a there's a comment in the chat about the dates on the numbers of for oil extraction costs.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends on the specific local context. So
Mm-hmm.
every microfield is going to give you different costs of production. So don't take those numbers to the bank as to when like Western Canadian oil is profitable or not. Um, anyways, there's the broad story. You're talking
Okay.
about a story of superabundance, of weight,
Yep.
of massive wastage, and the the issue here is distribution. So natural gas
Mm.
is extremely cheap to produce. It's found all over the world. It's it isn't explored for independently because it's produced in such massive quantities as a byproduct of oil extraction.
Mm.
If
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
actually explore for natural gas instead of exploring for oil and finding natural gas, you will probably find much more of it. And so, whenever he talks about the importance of a natural gas resource in geopolitics, have that context in the back of your mind. The reason
Mm-hmm.
you're discussing natural, like for example, if you thought that the reason the U.S. was considering invading Iran was because of their large role in the production of natural gas, you would
Mm-hmm.
be very badly mistaken. The
Yeah.
that natural gas is going to stay in Iran unless there's major infrastructure built. And even if there was major infrastructure built, um, the reasons to build that infrastructure in Iran rather than somewhere else would be political. They would not be as a consequence of the scarcity of natural gas.
Right. Right. So yeah. So you said it's a little bit different than oil, where, like I said, it seems more broad now, but at one time you could plausibly make a case that, hey, there's a lot of squabbling over the Middle East because that's where you get your, you know, that's where the oil supply is basically, or the oil that's easy to get to. But for natural gas, that whole story does not hold up. But you're
No,
saying once you, as I pointed out, a pipeline carrying natural gas from oil became a target of interest in the middle of a war, right? So
yeah.
that's the
So
distribution. That's where they've set it up to do the expensive process of what do they liquefy it or do they transport it in gas form?
well, it depends on whether you're doing a pipeline or you're doing ships. So liquefied natural gas is natural gas that has been uh, radically cooled to become a
Mm-hmm.
liquid,
Okay.
and then the reason you do that is to carry it on a ship across the ocean.
Right.
So this is how natural gas is exported to Europe or to Asia from the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, whereas the natural gas exported from Russia to Europe is exported by pipeline as gas. Um, and you can do that by pipeline because the volatility of it in that form doesn't really matter unless, of course, you have somebody blow your pipeline up.
Mm-hmm. Um, okay. So then, are we ready for the next thing here? Um, oh, this continues to underscore the point you're making, which is this is charting the natural gas vented and flared. I guess, as you said, this wouldn't include Russia, but for reporting
No,
countries.
this is just the
Right.
U.S.
Oh, this is, I'm sorry, U.S. only. Okay, U.S. natural
and
gas vented and flared. And why does it spike up in
this is what
2019 or
this is
whatever?
one of the really important points. So not all oil deposits have comparable natural gas associated with them.
Uh huh.
So when you drill in Texas, you get very little natural gas by comparison. And
Mm-hmm.
when you drill in the upper Midwest, you get vast, vast quantities of natural gas, whether you want
Mm.
it or not.
Okay.
And so when fracking in the Midwest became an important component of U.S. oil production, with that came the radically increased production of natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
And so you saw in the period before 2020, when the Bakken Shale was at its peak of activity, uh, a lot of flaring going on. And since the Biden administration came in and revoked permits on many of those oil fields, you've
Mm.
seen a substantial reduction in flaring.
I
And
see. So one way to read this that isn't entirely inaccurate is the peak shows uh, natural gas extraction from uh, the upper Midwest, and as it climbs down, it's a shift back to Texas or something like that.
that's right. And
Huh.
so
Okay.
what you're actually watching here in looking at natural gas production in the US is shifts in the um, distribution of economic gains
Right.
from drilling.
Yeah.
And so the story of U.S. oil and gas production over the last maybe 15 or 20 years has been a story of of shifting location of profits and therefore shifting political interests.
Hmm.
So
Right.
with
And
that
and
kind of in the
and okay, yeah. And you're going to explain the political aspect, or okay, yeah. We're getting into the. I mean, you're already introducing the theme, and you're going to hammer it home more shortly. But what you're saying is, don't think of this as the market, the free market in operation. It just
yeah
became more efficient to get natural gas from here or there. That's not. It seems like that is. I'm sure that's an aspect of what's going on, right? What's expensive and what's cheap to do, and so on and so forth. But the major shifts you're saying tend to be driven by politics, not by economic efficiency, right?
that's right. So
Yeah.
because natural gas is pretty widely distributed, because it can only be produced in these effectively in these really large scale operations because of the transport cost problem,
Mm-hmm.
uh, its exploitation has been extremely political.
Mm.
Uh, so the next the next screenshot here kind of okay, yeah, we'll hit this and then we'll hit the next piece of it.
And
So
this is the kind of thing, Black Horse, where it's like you see this float across, and for the normal Joe, right, who doesn't understand all the context you've just given us, it's like you have the suspicion that something's going on, but it's hard to make anything of it, right? And
yeah,
it's such an obscure kind of thing. It's like, or it seems obscure, it seems irrelevant, right? Because most of us don't know that natural gas is generating most of our electricity. Most of us don't know that there's a lot of politics in play in natural gas distribution, right? All that stuff. So it just floats across, and it's like, oh, why would Biden be involved in that? It's probably for some reason that's not good, but I can't make heads or tails of it,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah, so the Biden administration has decided that no new permits will be issued for liquefied natural gas distribution plants. So, what's the purpose of this here? The purpose of this is to restrict the ability of the United States to export natural gas because
Hmm.
liquefied natural gas is the process. Most natural gas isn't going south to Mexico; it's going east or west across the ocean, and in order to be exported east or west across the ocean it's got to be liquefied to be put on ships.
Hmm.
So the Biden administration uh, has noticed that this process is radically expanding, and for whatever reason has decided that this process should no longer expand.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Hmm. I
So
didn't
if we
actually read through the statements. I don't know statement. I don't know if there's anything you want to call out. I mean, it starts by talking about the environment, of course.
oh no, it's just bullshit, bullshit, bullshit.
Yeah, yeah.
Therefore, we won't let natural gas liquefaction facilities be approved.
Gotcha.
So
Right.
so it's very sad that there have been wildfires destroying whole neighborhoods, and therefore we need to stop this process, even though this process has nothing to do with wildfires.
Yeah, right, right.
So this is kind of interesting because there's been a huge argument by the kind of geopolitics bros that what has been going on in Eastern Europe has been a big shift in from European dependence on Russian natural gas to European dependence on American natural gas.
Hmm.
And I I think it's worth kind of putting that out there and then coming back to the domestic political implications of that. So let's examine that case for a moment, and then we'll come back to this decision from the White House.
Gotcha. Oh, and I just
So
wanted to highlight because it's really hard to see. This statement came out 1 week ago. So
yeah,
okay, so right, this is a map of shale gas basins in Europe, and I'll just read the key out for people real quick. If it's a red with a stop kind of thing, red with a line through it, that's a ban or a moratorium on shale gas extraction. The greens are it's either allowed or allowed and permits issued. Okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
and critically, the green circles that don't have a P in them mean that
Mm-hmm.
there's no active extraction, right? The only
Oh,
places where
okay.
there's active extraction are places where there's a P.
Got it. Got it.
So you'll notice if you look around there that the majority of those circles are not active extractors right now. So uh, Europe has massive reserves of natural gas of its own,
Mm-hmm.
and is broadly speaking not exploiting those reserves.
Hmm.
The exception
Yeah.
being Norway, where those reserves have, subsequent to this map, been developed.
I was
Pretty
gonna
much
say
every other,
it looks like it's less in the west and more in the east of Europe.
yeah. Although the field in the North Sea is enormous,
Oh, okay.
you could in the extraction you could do in the Netherlands, Germany, North Germany, Denmark, Britain. You power the whole of Europe trivially
Okay.
from it if you wanted to.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The point here is that the reason why Europe is dependent on imports for natural gas is political. It is not as a result of resource scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's
these
there.
fields
Yeah.
exist all over Europe
Mm-hmm.
uh, for a variety of political reasons. Somebody who knows European politics better than I do can assess what those might be. But there's been a decision taken not to exploit this resource and instead to import natural gas from Russia or the United States at much higher price points.
Mm-hmm. Right. With the Russia part having recently stopped. Right.
Yes, yeah, and
Yeah.
we'll get there. We'll get there next, right? So if we
Right.
look at EU imports of natural gas by trading partner, I thought this was quite interesting. This is comparing third quarter
Mm-hmm.
2022 to third quarter 2023. So this is
Mm-hmm.
both after the Ukraine war and the Russia sanctions. So even after the imposition of sanctions, market share has continued to shift toward the United States and to
Mm-hmm.
shift away from countries that are not related to sanctions. So, for example, Norway has declining market share, Qatar has declining market share. This is not because of sanctions. This is, other factors.
Mm-hmm. For some reason,
So,
Algeria is coming out great here.
yeah, yeah,
Not
interesting.
sure what the story is there, but anyway.
But critical to this story is that a whole bunch of um, fracking companies in the Midwest of the United States are making money, or between 2022 and 2023, we're making radically more money
Mm-hmm.
selling natural gas overseas to Europe.
Right.
So, a very strange consequence of the foreign policy decisions of the Biden administration in Ukraine has been to enrich middle Americans. I'm quite
Okay.
sure that's exactly what they intended, right? So, interestingly, this is part of a broader reorientation in the natural gas market. So, if we shift over and look at U.S. export, look at it from the U.S. end rather than the European end, you see that U.S. exports of LNG have, even before the beginning of the Ukraine war, uh, radically reoriented from being directed toward Asia to being directed toward Europe. So this
Mm-hmm.
again is a surprise to nobody who's paid close attention, but uh, anyways, it's a thing that's happened.
Right. Orient away from Asia and towards Europe. Well, okay, but this would fit in with the sanction story we told, which is that Russia simply started selling its resources to Asia. Yeah,
That's correct. You're seeing
yeah.
a dual
Basically,
reorientation.
Russia was selling to Europe. That was stopped um, by sanctions. So Russia sold to Asia, and the U.S. sold to Europe. Overall, just more expensive for everybody because it was probably the arrangement before was probably a little more natural with Russia shipping stuff right to Asia, which
Well,
it is.
critically, there's this huge pipeline infrastructure that exists from
Yeah,
Russia to
right,
facilitate that. So it's going
right,
to make everything more expensive, but it
yeah,
also has pretty radical geopolitical implications, um, because you end up with like a different economic orientation for the global flow of trade,
hmm,
right? So instead, so you're reorienting a significant fraction of industrial trade from one direction to a different direction. Um, you're tying the Chinese economy much more closely to Russia's and much less closely to the United States,
yeah,
particularly the kind of steel part of that economy.
right. And then Europe is
While
uh,
Europe is stuck buying expensive liquefied natural gas from the United States because they
right,
will neither develop their own resources nor buy cheap gas from Russia that can be delivered via pipeline.
right. But I
You know,
get the feeling this is a happy outcome from the point of view of like the U.S. State Department or something.
well, see, this is why I think this memo from the Biden administration is fascinating because if you were thinking about America as a whole from a foreign policy point of view, you'd say, "Oh, this is a great outcome. The U.S. is going to realize all this revenue from and kind of recapture political influence among its vassal states in Europe."
Hmm.
However, uh, what the U.S. State Department probably didn't realize until the policy kind of started to take effect is that they're going to enrich all their domestic political opponents by doing this.
Uh-huh.
So uh, you have this. I like. I would frame this memo if I was in the if this was my profession, I would frame this memo because it's a beautiful example uh, of politics. Um, you have the Biden administration suddenly waffling between is it more important to make sure that my political opponents do not become enriched, or is it more important for me to support my global empire abroad?
Right, right, yeah.
Right. And the magic solution to do both is to uh, resource your natural gas from some random part of the empire. So maybe if we had control over oil fields in, say, Iran, then we could both make Europe dependent on our empire for their source of natural gas. And at the same time, we could not enrich our domestic political opponents.
Wait,
So,
so
you
you're
know, that would
coming
be
back
really good.
you're coming back around to saying it is important
Well, I'm
to
coming
the
back to
regime to grab Iran?
I'm coming back to well, this might be an innovative solution, right?
Oh, okay.
But you're not looking at national interests of the United States. You're looking at sectional interests of
Yeah,
particular parties within the United States,
right,
right?
right.
So it might not be in the U.S. national interest or the U.S. imperial interest to grab this thing, but it might be in the sectional interest of a particular part of the U.S. regime to do this in order to avoid enriching their competitors,
Right.
right?
Now, now in the case of the trucker protests in Canada, um, you pointed out that they were directly being funded by the Western interests, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and do you happen to know whether, you know, people and guys in Texas involved in natural gas are like funding Trump or something? You know, like is there that
Yeah,
direct of a connection or?
I mean, I don't know exactly what the politics of Texas oil is. I
Mm-hmm.
know that they shifted quite. So they used to be clients of Team Red, like in the tank up to the neck, in the
Mm-hmm.
Bush era.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's still the case or not. I'm not close enough to
Right.
those politics. Um, but you're looking. They're definitely a sectional interest in the U.S. regime. Um, you know, I would typically associate them with Team Lindsey Graham,
Right.
which is you know, it's quite interesting. It From that point of view, the Ukraine war makes a lot. It makes a lot of sense why that part of the Republican Party supported the Ukraine war so hard. It definitely served their economic interests.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Right.
But the point is that the, that when assessing, so like there's a bunch of broad conclusions we can draw from this
Yeah.
assessment of the natural gas market. The first of the broad conclusions is that the sort of catabolic collapse, people who think we're running out of energy,
Mm-hmm.
conclusion, this is just not accurate.
Right.
You
Yeah.
have uh, it's not accurate globally. It's not accurate in any of the major sections of the developed world. Um, to the extent that we're running short on energy, that's a policy decision,
Yeah.
not a fact of nature. So
Right. And
you
it's
always,
confusing because generally I would say, hey, well, look at the prices, right? But
yeah,
when you have governments all over Europe and the United States empire shutting down pipelines and green parties in Europe and the price does end up reflecting the cutting off of supply for political reasons, right? That starts to come into
yes.
it. Yeah.
And we talked about this when we talked about the global food market. So food is kind of the other end of this extreme where anybody with an acre of land can go out
Yeah.
and start producing food and marketing it. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
very, very flexible and price sensitive kind of market. Whereas the natural gas market, because of how large and sophisticated the distribution infrastructure has to be,
Mm-hmm.
it's enormously sensitive to political considerations and takes a long time to adjust because you have these like multi-billion-dollar projects crossing jurisdictional lines.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very. If you're an environmental activist, it is trivially easy to target the critical infrastructure for natural gas um, distribution to like deny permits and affect the natural gas market. Whereas if you wanted to target agriculture, it is very, very hard to find a choke point to make the kind of agriculture you don't like go away,
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
right? Um, so this is an important point when looking at geopolitics. It's an important point when assessing, your personal situation. Uh, the extent to which you're paying lots of money for energy to heat your home. This is not a consequence of like resource depletion. This is a
Yeah. Yeah.
deliberate policy decision. This is people who want you to pay lots of money for energy for whatever reason.
Right. Right.
Equally, the idea that this is some kind of scarce resource that the global empires of the world are kind of competing to conquer is uh, it's not true in a straightforward way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like if Europe really wanted to provide its own natural gas, it's not like they would need to conquer Russia to do it,
Yeah.
right? Um, Equally, if the U.S. wanted to corner the natural gas market, it's not like they need to bomb Iran to shut them out of it or something. Um, there's, sorry, that's probably not correctly expressed. The uh, the extent to which the U.S. or Russia or any other um, political entity dominates the natural gas market is going to be a consequence of its military position and its internal politics rather than a consequence of resource availability.
Right, right. Just what's available on the ground. Um,
Yeah.
I just want to jump in with this comment from Blotto. Providing natural gas to NATO was the cornerstone of Trump's foreign policy. Natural gas was called freedom molecules. I had not heard that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and Bill
And
Wilson,
then,
sorry, one more thing. Bill Wilson says one
yeah.
must wonder how much pollution is generated because they'd rather own the chuds than let pipelines have the energy be used for something.
Yeah. The
Yeah, I mean
answer to that
that's
is a lot. A
yeah, and that's part
lot.
of the point of what I was saying about the sanctions and destroying the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Um, all this resulted in inefficiency. Another way of putting that is we're generating a lot of pollution we don't need to be to move resources around in inefficient ways around the world because of various wars and
Yeah, imperial
policy
politics.
decision, imperial politics and stuff. Yeah,
So that's definitely like a big deal. I mean, in Canada, this is what the carbon tax is all about. So after the Trudeau government, realized that simply refusing pipelines was insufficient to prevent the export of oil from Western Canada, the next strategy was to impose carbon taxes on the flaring of natural gas, so you can't
yeah.
extract the oil because you can't do anything with the natural gas because we won't let you build pipelines, and you can't flare it because we're going to charge you money for every like CO2 particle you release when you're flaring it.
Yeah, right.
Um, and you can't vent it. Venting was another thing that they were doing out west,
Hmm.
because we're going to categorize natural gas as a like a GHG, and therefore we're going to carbon tax it. Um,
Right,
so screw you, Western elite. You can't make money.
right. Yeah, and I
Um,
think you made your final big point you wanted to make sure to make already, right? Which is that the Russia-Ukraine war shifted things around, started enriching um, Texas, and then in the Canada situation, Alberta, and that was not viewed as a great outcome by the regime. Maybe an
no,
unanticipated one, I don't know, but once they recognized it, they wanted to stop it.
yeah. Anyways, they've decided that this is not good. So,
Yeah.
ban on LNG facilities.
Mm.
Hopefully that'll work, right? So, anyways, interesting market, lots of political consequences, um, some geopolitical consequences, but more, there's a lot of people out there talking about the geopolitics of natural gas that very
Hmm.
clearly don't understand these market fundamentals,
Right.
or these kind of industry fundamentals for how it's generated, how it's distributed. Um, you know, just like the Iraq War, if it was about oil, they did a really crappy job of acquiring Iraqi oil.
Yeah.
If you invade Iran for natural gas, like either you're crazy or you're lying. And
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I'll leave it to smarter minds than me to figure out whether they're crazy or lying.
Um, yeah. So I like this because I remember the no blood for oil stuff. Lefties protesting the invasion of Iraq. Um, and though I also at the time opposed the invasion of Iraq in 2003, um, I had other reasons for it. And it's really good for you to point out that, how do you say, that some of these foreign policy things would be related to manipulating energy markets. You wouldn't say that's crazy as a very, very broad uh, connection, right? But
Yeah.
the devil's in the details on this, and just saying, you know, uh, invaded Iraq for oil, or they're trying to get it on with, Lindsay, right? He's trying
Yeah.
to get it on with Iran because of they're the third top supplier of, or I'm sorry, third top producer of natural gas. It's going to sound pretty dumb if you actually know the market well. Some of these
The,
things.
that's right. And I
Yeah.
also point this out for what I call the Gellerman amnesia effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're very familiar with this when looking at mainstream media, that if you actually know something about the topic the mainstream media is discussing, you'll quickly find out that they don't provide very accurate analysis. And
Mm-hmm.
then, hopefully for them, you completely forget about this when they talk about something you don't know about, and you just completely buy what they say. Uh, but the same effect exists in sort of dissident political analysis or dissident foreign policy analysis. You should listen to what these people say when they talk about a topic you really do know something about, so you can
Mm-hmm.
evaluate the quality of their analysis. So
Right.
if somebody's when you're looking at people talking about foreign affairs, and they make claims related to the energy market. If you have a basic grounding in how the energy market actually works, you might be able to assess the quality of the work that you're looking at so that you can avoid looking stupid.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and the one guy who was commenting on this, he said something like, geopolitics is not really my area. And so he was kind of
Yeah,
caveating what he said, like
yeah,
you
yeah,
you might ignore me on this one, So probably very important if you're gonna speak outside of your area where you really understand things. I don't think that's completely wrong, but it's a good to give people a fair warning and say, I'm really speculating here. I'd have to dig deeper into it, or I'd love to hear from somebody who knows this area and tell me if that makes any sense or not, right? But
yeah.
know what you know and know what you don't know if you're going to comment on public affairs.
Yeah. Well, the other thing to point out here is that this is also like a very, very large tailwind to US reindustrialization in the long term. So
Mm,
for however long this situation goes on, where you where natural gas is basically free in the Midwest and quite expensive in Europe and most of the third world, um, basically anywhere that's not the US, Canada, China, or Russia.
hmm
Um, this is a kind of subsidy for doing like heavy industry in those jurisdictions of a scale that we haven't seen since railroads existed in those countries, but not elsewhere in the world.
So so
Um,
so Trump can get elected and then claim credit for reindustrializing America, right?
that's right. Uh,
Even though it,
in
it had to do with something completely different.
Well, in fact, if you manage to keep this situation going, you almost have like a post World War II situation where doing like heavy industrial processes is so much cheaper in a jurisdiction where natural gas is widely available than it is in Europe.
hmm
You might see like a redomination of many industrial markets from either China or the United States in very much the same way you saw like a duopoly on industry in the post World War II era because of the physical destruction of manufacturing infrastructure in the rest of the developed world.
Right. Okay. Well,
I mean,
I'm gonna do handoffs if you're ready. Oh, did you have a
yeah,
last
go for it.
comment? Okay.
No, I mean, of course, all that's caveated on the continued, um, it continuing to be fundamentally illegal to extract natural gas in most European countries, and
Right.
who
Yeah.
knows
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
long that lasts.
Yeah. If the Green parties get defeated in Europe, then that would change things. But I don't know when that would be happening. So.
Well, I mean, the Green parties of Europe, the regime in America says that they're a Russian psyop to make Europe dependent on Russian energy. In Russia, they say they're an American psyop to make Europe dependent on American energy. So
Yeah.
you can
Right. Right.
decide which of those to believe.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Black Horse. Really, really helpful, and that is one of the things I've liked about the series we've done together, is to bring more context and nuance to some of this stuff. Where, like I said, I mean, I think you probably see this, right? People will sense something is up, but they just won't be able to put together a story that really hangs together, right? Because
Yep.
they don't have the knowledge to really connect the dots in the right way. Um, Even though they'll kind of know, you know, is the U.S. involved in the Middle East? Does it have something to do with energy? Well, yeah, that's probably part of the story, right? But actually
Yeah.
telling the story properly is not so simple. Um, okay, I wanted to do three things really quick. One is shill for myself. Next week, I am going to try to cover this whole book. I'll have to finish reading it by then. But I'm really enjoying it. Rodney Stark, who I've featured before on in a speech I gave, I went through a book by him, basically summarized a book by him. This is a book called The Triumph of Faith by Rodney Stark. And what he takes on is what's called the secularization thesis. That's the idea that as countries modernize, they will become more secular. Um, it was a very popular thesis in 1950 or something like
Yeah.
that. A lot
Yeah.
of people still view the world that way. the
even in
purpose.
20 even in like 2005 when I was in university,
Oh,
this was the dominant view in
yeah.
Canadian academia.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it lasted a long time, much longer than it should have, because as this book demonstrates, and I'm going to try to summarize real quick next week, um, uh, the predictions of the secularization thesis have not panned out at all. And in fact, when you even look for some of the evidence that the secularization folks claim supports their thesis, it doesn't even make sense. That is, you do not find a correlation between those countries that are more modern and those countries that are more secular. It's a scatter plot. Anyway, I'm going to go over all this next week. And the other big headline from this is the massive religious resurgence over the last several decades. And even in 2005, Black Horse, they should have known better if they were paying attention, because it
Yes.
was well underway and written about in the book by Paul Johnson, where he said this was the big surprise of the end of the 20th century, is that really, for some people, that religion didn't die, but in fact resurged in a mighty way. And by religion, I don't just mean Christianity, by the way, religious resurgence across the board globally. So very
Yep.
interesting, and he gives you the evidence here. So I look forward to going over that with you guys next
Yeah.
week. It's a topic of
Interestingly,
great interest to
the
me. Oh, wait a
the
sec.
only the
Go
only
ahead.
losers of the sort of 21st century religious resurgence are African tribal religions and
Yeah.
traditional Chinese folk religions.
Yep, there you go. You got it.
So
Yeah. Okay, then it kicked in, and you might have heard it. Starting right now, my friends Panama Hat and Simiagog are talking about the British classic TV show Dad's Army. I've dropped a link in there if you want to jump over to that. And then in 2 hours, we will be having, more like 3 hours. Yeah, the way YouTube figures time is kind of weird. The Old Glory Club will be doing its weekly current event show, and you can see the who's on the cover and that the title is Homeward Bound. So anyway, fun shall be had.
oh,
Oh, and I particularly wanted to encourage. It says featuring Patrick Casey, our friend Patrick Casey, who I got to meet at the UK event last year, or year before last, I guess. He just got kicked off YouTube. So that's
that's too
sad.
bad.
He'd really built up a channel. So I hadn't. I don't think I. No, I hadn't been on it, but a number of friends had been on his show. So he's going to keep going on Rumble and stuff. But we really wanted to support him this week with that blow from big tech. So anyway, both those links are in the live chat. So please grab them and go for your evening entertainment. All right. Thank you, Black Horse, very much. And hopefully we will be together on February 15th, 2 weeks from now, to talk about something else. Okay. Thank you, sir.